affiliated with the Colorado Renewable Energy Society, and we're the northern chapter, which makes us NCRES. Anyone here not familiar with CRES at all? Okay. I think I do my spiel. I should know this by heart, but I worked in sales all day. Sometimes I want to stop talking. Hard to believe. Okay, so CRES, Colorado Renewable Energy Society, CRES, and our local chapters provide education, policy, advocacy, and community engagement that help accelerate Colorado towards a carbon-neutral future powered by 100% renewable energy. Founded in 1996, we're a statewide, nonpartisan 501c3 supported by our sustaining individual members, our business sponsors, as well as donations. You can sign up for newsletters, social media, and become a member or donor at cres-energy.org, CRES-energy.org. Also make sure to check out our YouTube channel. We're pushing 290 videos. Big thanks to Brian, because he has done so much of the editing of our recent work and covering all topics, energy, general sustainability, green building, and so on. We're pushing 1.45 million views on that channel. In terms of our business sponsors, always give a big shout out to Prudhoe Valley REA, Sinton Instruments, Platte River Power Authority, who actually ran for 8 hours on continuous 100% wind and solar, and a little bit of hydro the other week. So they world good names.
That's why they need those gas turbines.
And the price just tripled.
You don't want to talk about that.
But also Solaris Energy, Sandbox Solar, Greystone Technology, and Bright Sense Energy. Couple of quick announcements before we get going. Next Monday, we're hosting a webinar for what it's worth getting DER value right. That's distributed energy resources. It's really, it'll be November 3rd, 6 p.m. With Carl Robigo, and he's got a resume too long for me to describe. He's been a utilities commissioner. He's a lawyer. He's just incredible. And he's really an expert in terms of looking at how DERs fit into the overall picture of rate structure, net energy metering, really looking at the cost-benefit analysis. So this is really, as we kind of move along in Colorado, we're going to have to reform and have a new net energy metering law. So this is sort of our first course in terms of establishing the baseline of how we look at that. Then on November 20th, 6:30 p.m. down in Denver at the Odell 5 Points Tap Room. We have Powering the Block, neighborhood scale electrification in Denver. And we're going to have a group of graduate students from University of Colorado Boulder's Master of the Environment program that are doing a project on this, basically how do we electrify basically block by block in Denver. And as for those who know Denver, it really has an aggressive climate and electrification program. I know we do some good work up here, but gosh, they just have resources and they throw everything behind it. Then on Tuesday, December the 2nd, back here at Odell's, here in this room, we will have our holiday party along with our friends at Colorado Green Building Guild, CGBG. I'm actually learning to say that right versus that place in New York City. And then on November the 18th at the Lyric.
Yes, so I'm with the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. We're an educational nonprofit on agrivoltaics out of Jack's Solar Garden in Longmont, which is an agrivoltaic site. And we are hosting our documentary screening film at the Lyric on November 18th. And we will have panelists of agrivoltaic experts, local producers. It should be really exciting. So.
What time is it?
It's at 6 p.m. at the Lyric.
And if you get really fancy with it, add a QR code you can scan for tickets.
And we should be getting out through all of our social media. Reed Crossley, we're really good at we've been doing events with all the folks at Calc and Jack's Solar Garden for a couple years now, and agrivoltaics is a fantastic thing and a fantastic opportunity to alleviate some misguided concerns over loss of agricultural productivity. But no, they're doing great work, and we love to support it. And then, yeah, so crest-energy.org, if you go to the events page, Reed will probably have that up here, even though we're about to launch a new website. He will keep the old website updated. And then in terms of housekeeping, Joel, do you want people to jump in with questions while you're talking?
Yes, I do.
Yes, great.
We'll keep it informal.
All right, off to you, Joel.
Cool, thanks. Thank you for the intro, Peter. Especially thank you for the heads up about the Carl Ravago event coming up. I love Carl and his work. He did an interesting article in Utility Dive recently about community solar and the value of community solar, which, as you gather, is kind of the topic for today. I'm Joel Danforth. I'm the Senior Director of Equitable Community Solar with Grid Alternatives. Grid Alternatives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we do solar services for low-income households and low-income communities. So rooftop, multifamily, and then the big stuff, the community solar. That's what we're all about. Based in the Bay Area, in Berkeley and Oakland. We've got a Colorado office in Denver, great folks. We also have a Mid-Atlantic office up in Maryland. Our topic for today will be the technical guide to community-owned agrivoltaic solar gardens. I'll kind of expand upon what that is and what that's about. Basically, it's an initiative led by the Colorado Department of Agriculture. We won the contract for this, so we're developing this technical guide over the next 6-7 months. And this is my first presentation on the topic, so I get to hear from this wonderful crowd first. I'm super excited to hear your feedback. So the agenda for today, I'll provide an overview again of the technical guide to community-owned agrivoltaic solar gardens, and then we'll have discussion. And like Peter alluded to, we'll keep it informal. So let's talk about this Venn diagram here. Is everybody familiar with the concept of community solar? Show of hands if you are familiar with community solar. People are a little wishy-washy, kind of. Okay, well, community solar is basically centrally located solar connected to the grid. With conventional solar, you typically have it up on your rooftop. The energy from the solar goes through your house, powers your home, and anything extra gets pushed out onto the grid. That's net metering, right? It's netting the usage from the meter. With community solar, it's centrally located, so not on somebody's house, and has one meter, and the output of that meter is allocated to subscribers. So participating in a community solar program, you become a subscriber or a co-owner of a community solar facility. So that's the general concept here. That's really where the bulk of this effort will be, is around this nice blue circle in our Venn diagram here. Then we have, layered on top of that, community ownership, right? Bill and I were chatting before this presentation about that topic, about cooperative models and other types of community ownership. There's lots of that out there, right? REI is a great example of a co-op. Before coming to Grid Alternatives, I worked at United Power, which is a cooperative utility down near Denver in Adams County. So lots of different cooperative models exist out there. And there's other types of community ownership other than cooperatives as well. And we'll touch on that a bit as well. And then agrivoltaics. Show of hands, how many people are familiar with that concept of agrivoltaics? Surprisingly more than community solar, which is pretty cool. It's kind of a buzzword out there, but it's gaining some good traction. I think community solar can be a little bit confusing just because of the scheme that I just described. But agrivoltaics, we're really just talking about mixing agriculture with photovoltaics, agrivoltaics, right? And there's a lot of different ways that the folks at Calc can probably describe better than I of doing that. The most basic level is beekeeping, right? If you have pollinator habitat, you plant native flowers around your solar panels, boom, you've got agrivoltaics. I kind of think that's cheating I love pollinator habitat, I love bees, but I think agrivoltaics can be so much more than that, and that's part of what we're going to explore through this research initiative. Okay, so this is my diagram that I shared with Sam already. And Sam pointed out previously, Sam's here from Colorado Department of Agriculture. He pointed out previously, step number 1 needs to be community engagement. And of course that's the case. Going back to this one, that's where it all begins, is the community ownership. What is the community relationship with a solar project going to be? But if we're zooming in on just the blue bubble here, what does it take to build a community solar facility? This is the gist of it. If you are a solar person, you are familiar with some variation of this process here. And hopefully it's large enough that everybody can see. Starts with the siting and the feasibility, right? So community scale solar, we're talking typically pretty large acreage, right? The rule of thumb is about 1 megawatt for every 5 acres. So if you want to do a megawatt installation, you're looking at a 5-acre footprint. And that's before mixing in agrivoltaics, right? If you're trying to do agriculture there as well, you're going to need even more acreage depending on the setbacks between panels and so forth. So siting is a big part of it. Feasibility. Typically with a solar project, those of you who are solar installers know this process. You want to look at the meter data for the building that you're going to serve. How many kilowatt hours of electricity are they using each and every year? And the state law says you can go up to how much percentage? 200% of the annual usage for a house. In the case of community solar, it's actually capped at 120%, which is the old net metering cap. But typically, solar systems are sized to meet that percentage of annual electricity consumption. Design drawings. So this is the next big step and where my organization spends a fair amount of time. So this can be everything from doing a generation forecast for the solar, so how many kilowatt hours of solar do we expect to produce to meet that 100, 120, 200% of usage, right? So we'll do a generation forecast, typically a step 1, and that'll help us kind of right size, right? How many kilowatts of capacity do we need to fulfill 100% of utilization? In the case of community solar, we don't necessarily know that in advance, right? We don't necessarily know how many kilowatt hours a given household is going to use. So we typically size the project up, just try and make it the most economical in terms of cost and in terms of land utilization as possible. And then we try and fully subscribe out that community solar. Other types of design drawings we do, single line drawings, that's what you need for the utility, for the interconnection process. I'll come back to that. And then an elevation drawing that kind of displays what the physical attributes of the equipment is in terms of height and width and so forth. And then a site layout that gives you a bird's eye view of what this solar project is going to look like. So all of that goes into the design drawings. There's lots of other considerations there. Oftentimes geotechnical work, so we want to see what's underground. We want to know if the ground is hard, if it's rocky. If we're driving piles into the ground in order to mount single axis trackers on it, we need to know what types of obstacles we're going to hit. So geotechnical assessments are a big part of that. Land access agreements, again, with a typical community solar project or for a typical community solar developer, that is solid gold, right? You want minimum 5 acres for your solar development. And that's why you hear all of these rumors of for-profit solar developers going around hogging up as much farmland as they possibly can, trying to sign agreements with all these farmers so that they can have this land secured in order to leverage economies of scale and build as big as possible and drive down the cost of their project, the cost per kilowatt hour. So land access agreements are a huge part of typical community solar development. In the case of agrivoltaics, that box is probably already checked, right? If we're talking about agrivoltaics, we're probably interfacing with a rancher or a farmer who already has a site kind of picked out and designated for this purpose. So that's one key difference between typical community solar and the agrivoltaics lanes. The permitting. So here in Colorado, we have the home use rule, which is also referred to as the 1041 process. And that is the site permitting that each and every county has for developing projects of, I believe, 1 acre and larger, which would certainly qualify for large-scale solar. So oftentimes, the county will have its own process in terms of environmental assessments that a project will need to go through, in terms of neighborhood outreach to inform the neighbors that we're developing this large-scale project, give them the opportunity in a public forum to provide feedback on the development, and so on and so forth. So that's the 1041 process. What I'm curious about and what I'm hoping to explore through this technical guide is that really necessary? If we're talking about agrivoltaics, where it's kind of mixed use, it's agricultural and it's solar, to what extent do we really need to go through a formal 1041 permitting process? Ideally, the zoning would match up, and that's the other area of potential mismatch, right? Oftentimes you have to go through local zoning in order to develop a project. So if it's zoned industrial, then oftentimes that's what we're looking for conventional solar. But for agrivoltaics, it's going to be zoned agricultural. And there's going to be a trade-off there, right, between the zoning, agriculture versus industrial. And what standard do we land on? I'm not sure if you guys at Calc have arrived at any conclusions on that, but that will be worth exploring as well. The next step in the process is the interconnection agreement. Also, if you're into solar, you're familiar with this. This is the difficult part, because you have to convince the utility to allow you to physically connect to their antiquated infrastructure. You have to convince them to not overburden your project with excessive costs for doing so. And there's a fair amount of red tape to go through for doing that, right? Oftentimes around the nation, there's pretty common elements of any interconnection application agreement process. Oftentimes a system impact study, right? If the project is big enough and complicated enough, the utility will hire an independent consultant, an engineering firm, to do a system impact study to assess how is this project going to affect the grid as a whole, physical equipment that you're interconnecting with. So that can be lots of money and lots of months of time consumption. But other than that, there's also the fact of the physical equipment that they're going to use, whether it's transformers, reclosers, overhead lines, underground lines, poles, any of that type of thing that needs to be included to physically connect a project to the grid. The utility will have a consultant come up with all of that and provide you a quote as part of this interconnection process, and you get to pay for that. So that's the next kind of hurdle for the project. And keep in mind, we haven't really done anything. This is all just paperwork, right? For guys like me. Then comes financing, and I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Lately, financing has been pretty difficult in the renewable energy industry, in part because interest rates have just been high. And I think that financiers have been shying away just a little bit lately. I'm hoping that this trend kind of starts to ease, especially if the Federal Reserve eases rates tomorrow, which they might, who knows. Yeah, just like if you were going to finance a house with a mortgage, we finance solar projects often, typically over a 20-year term or whatever the life of the equipment is. The life of the equipment can be 30 years, but typically we don't get financed for 30 years. It's typically more like 20. The contracting piece, and this will be a big emphasis, I think, for this technical guide. So there's a number of different types of contract instruments, and I will go into those in much more gory detail coming up here. Construction, so that's the physical building of the facility. Typically 4 to 8 months for a 1 megawatt project. Sometimes more, it depends on the bureaucracy and red tape it's going through. The operations and maintenance, like any other piece of equipment, there's going to be that. And then subscription administration is the last complicated piece with community solar. So as I alluded to earlier, there's one meter, and the output of that meter is allocated to multiple households, right, that are subscribing to it. And that's what that subscription administration is all about. It's more complicated than it sounds, but I'll try and give you the bullet points for that here in this presentation. Okay, I think, Bill, you might have mentioned 24207 when we were talking before the presentation here. But this bill, Senate Bill or State Bill 24-207, that is the law of the land for community solar. As the first number implies, it's brand new. It was passed in 2024 and signed into law. Looks like a good one, at least on my first read. This bill does several things for community solar, among other types of distributed generation and distributed energy technologies. For community solar specifically, it requires the investor-owned utilities, which here in Colorado is Excel and Black Hills, to make 50 megawatts and 3.5 megawatts respectively of community solar capacity available each year in 2026 and 2027. So basically these investor-owned utilities, they put out an RFP, developers bid their projects into it, they pick the most cost-effective or whatever their selection criteria is for these projects. So this bill kind of sets the groundwork for that. One thing that I talked to anyone and everyone who will listen to about is this law applies to the investor-owned utilities, right? But that's a fraction of our state. In this state, we have municipal utilities like Fort Collins Utilities here in town. We have cooperative utilities like United Power or PDREA. And they are not covered by this law. They are governed by their own local board of directors, right? So that's why it's important, if you are part of a municipal utility like Fort Collins, that you be engaged and involved with your local electric board. Same thing with Platte River Power Authority, which is owned by the 4 municipalities here in northern Colorado: Fort Collins, Estes Park, Loveland, and Longmont. The law also, and this one's interesting, the law requires these utilities to provide bill credits equal to the retail value of electricity, which wasn't always the case, right? I'm going to try not to get into too much electric industry lingo, but just like with anything else, there's a wholesale rate and there's a retail rate, right? You go to Sam's Club, you pay the wholesale rate. You go to Walmart, you pay the retail rate for a product, right? Same thing applies with electricity. At the wholesale level, which is what community solar used to be credited at, that's basically the cost of operating a coal or gas-fired power plant. That's 4 cents a kilowatt hour, 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. The retail rate is the cost of that plus the transmission lines, plus the distribution lines, plus all the general and administrative fees. All of that gets baked into this retail rate that you and I pay on our electricity bill. And what this means is that if you or I are a subscriber to a community solar garden, then we are able to offset 1-for-1 our electricity usage, just like if we had solar on our roof, right? That's how net metering works. You can offset your electricity use 1-for-1 with rooftop solar. Wasn't always the case with community solar, and now it's codified into this law. So I think that's a wonderful thing. The utilities, another interesting thing that was incorporated into this law is what they call consolidated billing. So with conventional community solar, you get 2 bills. You get your community solar subscription bill, and you get your utility bill, right? And the idea is with community solar, the sum of those 2 should be a discount versus your one utility bill was previously, right? You want to save 20% or more by going solar. That's kind of part of the whole idea, right? But it's counterintuitive. Like everybody in this room probably gets that, right? You can pay a low fee for a community solar subscription, and your utility bill is mostly offset except for the minimum charge that they're going to charge you anyways, right? The service fee or whatever. For us, that makes sense. But for most consumers, you're looking at it and you're thinking, hey, I had one bill and now I'm paying 2 bills. And that's kind of counterintuitive for the average consumer. So what consolidated billing does is it requires these utilities to include that community solar subscription on the one utility bill. And so you can see it on your one utility bill. This is what my old utility bill was, this is what a new one is, and boom, there's a 20% discount. Versus if there's 2 separate bills, you're paying the 2 and then you have to add them up and figure out, oh, well, that's X% less than I was paying before. So it greatly simplifies things. I know probably more than you ever wanted to know about community solar, but that's why we're here. Community solar installations must be a minimum of 10 kilowatts, so that's basically your typical rooftop, household rooftop solar size. And then the maximum is 5 megawatts, so you can do the math, that's a minimum of 25 acres. But for agrivoltaic use, those facilities can be capped out at 10 megawatts. So doing the math again there, that's like 50 acres of land. This is important because it helps with economies of scale, right? The bigger you build something, the lower the cost is per unit of energy, right? So for example, if I were installing a 10 kilowatt system on somebody's roof, probably it would cost somewhere around $3 a watt to build that. Whereas up at 10 megawatts, I'm down below $2 a watt, right? So I'm saving 30% just because of economies of scale, right? The cost per panel is lower, the cost for the laborers doing the installation is lower per hour, so on and so forth. So that's the scale that we want to see, and I think that's another great aspect of this new law. If you want more information on this law, this group, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance.org, did a great summary of the law on this website, so you can take a picture or jot it down. It's also, you can Google, say, SB 24-207, it'll bring right up. You can read the original text from the legislature if you prefer. But this is a good summary of things in terms of, I think we can show that.
How difficult is it currently to get subscribers that are not connected to the utility where you cited your project?
How difficult is it to get subscribers not connected to the utility? That is one of the tricks. Technically, the community solar facility has to be connected to the utilities grid, and the subscribers to it have to be located in the service territory of that same utility, right? So me as a customer of Fort Collins Utilities, I cannot subscribe to a community solar program that's in Excel's service territory, serving Excel customers, right? So the utility is still very critical in that, in terms of both the physical connection and in terms of the billing, right?
And this law hasn't helped that at all.
Sorry?
This law hasn't changed that.
I don't believe so. There's a couple of emerging programs like that, like a virtual utility. I believe Massachusetts has a program like that, and I think California might be the other one. There's a couple of states that have done enabling legislation where basically a developer can build a big community solar facility and then just write a check to somebody over in Michigan, which is a really cool concept. I love it, but I don't think that's in
Colorado has 2. I can't remember the bill number, but it's only with Excel, but there is off-site virtual net metering available now, because we just did a subscription for Colorado State University with one of our Excel accounts. So it does exist, but it has to be an Excel account.
It's an Excel thing.
Yeah.
I knew they had off-site net metering, but not virtual net metering. Virtual net metering, by the way, and I'm glad you brought that up, Stacey. Virtual net metering is just a fancy way of saying that scheme that I described before. Conventional net metering is the solar is tied to your roof, feeds the appliances in your house, and the excess gets net metered, pushed out through the meter onto the grid, right? That's net metering. Virtual net metering is this other scheme that I described earlier. One meter centrally located, and the output of that meter is virtually allocated to subscribers to the community solar. I'm glad you used that term because that was an important concept to share. Community ownership models. So these are the ones that I've come across so far. I know there's going to be lots of others, but I'm really excited to explore this as part of the technical guide. So the conventional way, kind of start with that, LLCs, right? So oftentimes, renewables developers, each project is its own LLC. There's a lot of good reasons for that, not the least of which is if the project goes belly up, the entire company, parent company, doesn't go belly up with it. It gives them a little bit of insulation from that project. It also makes the project a little bit more transferable. So if you build a project and you monetize the tax credits and then you spin that project off, it's easier if it's an LLC and separate from the parent entity. Cooperative ownership models, like I mentioned earlier, that's a big one that we're going to be exploring through this technical guide. I won't go into too much detail on that right now. Community choice energy, I really like this one. It's kind of a blast from the past. House Bill 21-1269 was exploring this concept of community choice energy. Very popular in deregulated markets like California, PJM, which is Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and other organized markets, organized electricity markets. Basically, that enables a town like Fort Collins to say, we're going to offer a community choice aggregation, and we will purchase power from whoever we want, and we will provide that to our customers with or without a wires utility governing that transaction. So it kind of frees up the market a fair amount. And I think this became popular when Boulder was talking about municipalizing, and Pueblo, I think, has been talking about doing their own municipalization as well. We are not, Colorado is not currently a part of one of those types of markets, like in Pennsylvania or California, but we will be in 2030. So this may come back. This law required the Public Utilities Commission to explore the concept, and this is a link to their final report, which is really interesting if you're into reading Public Utilities Commission filings. Municipally owned community solar. There is a great example of this, not far from here. The old pickle plant site on Riverside was such a community solar installation, right? That one was built by Clean Energy Collective, which sadly has since gone bankrupt. They're no more. But I think they got purchased by another entity. But that facility, I think I just read in the news, it was offline for a few months too, probably because the parent company went bankrupt. But the city of Fort Collins recently refurbished it, brought it back online, so it's up and humming again. So when you're driving home tonight, drive by, was it Mulberry and Riverside, and look to the northeast corner, and you'll see that municipally owned community solar facility there. Nonprofit ownership model, so that's guys like me. Work for Grid Alternatives and other nonprofit organizations. If you're mission driven, you want to do community solar for a purpose, this is your avenue for doing that. And I apologize. I'm getting really talkative and I'm taking really much longer than I intended. But again, if you have questions or comments, just jump in here and share. Agrivoltaics. So again, I want us to look at more than just beekeeping, right? So livestock agrivoltaics is going to be a big part of this analysis. The one level above beekeeping is sheep grazing, right? Because oftentimes with the O&M for solar, you got to do vegetation management. It's a lot cheaper to let a herd of sheep run loose under the panels and eat up all of the grass than it is to pay somebody to mow or spray the weeds, right? So that's one level up, I would say, from beekeeping. But it's a good one. I mean, that's still more, that's a better agricultural product coming out of the process. Byron from the Agrivoltaic Learning Center is really into this one, cattle. So the first large-scale solar project I worked on was the Rawhide Flats at the Rawhide Power Plant. It's a big 20-megawatt installation. And as you probably know, Platte River has bison as their mascot. And there's this huge herd of bison out there in this field that we're going to build this solar in. And we got chased away from building solar in that location because the bison would rub up. The bison love to scratch. They actually have a huge metal post with carpet wrapped around it, and the bison will rub up against it and scratch themselves. The concern was they would do that to solar and damage it. And that's kind of the concern with cattle grazing with agrivoltaics. It's not insurmountable, right? You just build a stronger structure that's not going to be susceptible to being damaged by cattle, right? So that's kind of, I think, maybe the next iteration of agrivoltaic solar. Really interested in exploring that. Commodity crops. So, Sam, what did you say the primary agricultural products in the state are?
Corn, wheat, and hay.
Corn, wheat, and hay. So that's what I'm referring to when I say commodity crops. So big fields, oftentimes center pivot, right? If you're driving around rural northern Colorado, you'll see these, if you look at it from an aerial, they're circles, but there's a center pivot sprinkler that wraps around the field and sprays a circular area for crops to grow. But in the four corners of that center pivot, there's plenty of room available for solar. So good secondary use for those commodity crops. Also, oftentimes, and I know the folks at Sandbox Solar have done a lot of work in this area, tractor accessibility, right? So if you're developing solar co-located with any types of crops, you need your spacing between solar arrays to be wide enough that you can drive a tractor between them for the harvest. So that's another topic we'll be exploring further in the technical guide. And then this one I think is maybe more niche, but I really like it, is produce agrivoltaics, right? Orchards like in Palisade peaches, great application area. Fruits and vegetables, Rocky Ford cantaloupe, great opportunity for agrivoltaics there. So that's maybe the third category we're exploring for agrivoltaics in the state. I feel like I beat this one to death, the pre-development. So I'll just flash this slide here really quick. This is the one I threatened to come back to though, the financing and contracts. So interconnection agreement, I kind of mentioned that earlier, but that is a contract between you and the utility to physically connect to the electrical grid, right? Very stringent. Term sheet. This is often what the banks use for pitching financing for the project. Should define the interest rate, the loan fees, and the loan duration for a given project. And we'll probably provide some guidance and pointers to farmers and ranchers negotiating financing for agrivoltaic community solar projects. Power purchase agreements, often not really necessary with community solar. If you're a conventional solar developer and you're just connecting to the electric grid, and you have a relationship between you and the utility, you're not selling subscriptions to individual households, just straight to the utility, this is the vehicle you will typically use. But it can often be the form of, once you do have your interconnection agreement with the utility, and you're providing power through subscriptions, sometimes that can take the form of a power purchase agreement. And that's essentially what each individual subscriber is signing, is a mini power purchase agreement. The PPA moniker is typically used with that. Basically, it just sets the price. How many pennies per kilowatt hour are you paying each and every month for the output of that solar? But as with everything with lawyers, those can get extremely complicated extremely quickly. And then the big one, engineering, procurement, and construction contracts, or EPCs. This will be a good one for if you are a co-op and you want to develop your own agrivoltaic community solar. You will probably want to contract that work out to one of the experts, such as some of you in this room, who can build these things. And that will define the scope, schedule, and cost for construction of the facility, along with agreement of quality standards that will need to be met. So with solar, oftentimes there's performance standards that we're looking for in terms of how many kilowatt hours it should be pushing out for each hour of sunlight that it receives, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into that. Each one of these individually could probably be 50 plus pages, so we're not going to provide complete examples of each of them in the technical guide, but we want to give some pointers on this is how it's done and what it looks like. Subscription administration, and this is, I think, my last slide. So I'll just touch on this. Historically, there's been a couple of different models for community solar. The oldest model was the capacity model, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that facility I mentioned at the pickle plant site on Riverside is an example of a capacity model. And what that is you pay up front as a subscriber for your share of solar, right? So you pay $1,000 out of pocket, and you get allocated 2% of a community solar array. And at the ribbon cutting, you can go out there with a Sharpie and you can sign the back of your panels and say, this one's mine. And then you get paid back over time, right? Kind of like conventional net metering. You pay up front and then you get a return on investment over time. Most of the industry has gotten away from this model and has moved on to the energy model, which is kind of like I described on the previous slide, like a mini power purchase agreement. You are agreeing to pay a fixed price for every kilowatt hour you receive. So instead of paying up front and receiving a return over time, instead you're paying like a utility rate, pennies per kilowatt hour rate. And all of the financing and costs, capital costs to build the thing will be baked into that pennies per kilowatt hour rate, which in theory should be lower than the utility bill that you're paying for. In my work, this makes a lot of sense because Grid Alternatives serves low-income households, right? So we want to lower that barrier to entry. If you're a low-income household, you don't have $1,000 to cough up and expect to get paid back over 10 plus years before you're at your break-even point, right? You want to see a savings instantly on your very first bill, which is why this energy model has become so important. But with these new community ownership models that we're exploring, that might not necessarily be the case. It might make more sense to have something more like a capacity model where there's an upfront payment and a return on investment over time. There's a question back here, go ahead.
Yeah, is that lower cost based on government incentive programs and whatnot, or is it simply due to the economies of scale and the cooperative model?
Yes.
What's driving that?
It's both. It is both. Yeah, so the question was, is that cost savings driven more by incentives or by economies of scale? So short answer is both. For extremely large scale projects, like 100 megawatts, I've seen energy prices as low as 2 cents a kilowatt hour. If you think about your electric bill, it's 13, 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So there's a savings right there. The tax credits provide 30 to 50% on top of that, right? Which they're going away now, unfortunately. So there's that. We're not going to have incentives or quote-unquote subsidies available for solar. But yeah, the bottom line is, or was historically, that the pennies per kilowatt hour you would pay is lower because the capital cost is lower because the tax credit takes a chunk of that capital cost, lowering the amount you have to repay over time. Good question. Other components of community solar subscription administration, marketing and enrollment. This is a big one. So identifying the households that will qualify for your community solar and getting them to sign a mini PPA to enroll in the program. That's easier said than done. Anyone, I don't know if any of you have identified as solar door-to-door salespeople, but those people work really hard. It's really difficult, and there's a lot of complexities in that market. I'm not going to say all of them are great, fair actors, but with community solar, the standard is much higher. In particular for low-income households, like what my organization serves, we want to verify that that household qualifies. Some of that has also been simplified by that 24207, that new bill. Households are able to self-attest that they qualify. Oftentimes, if they're receiving LIHEAP benefits, low-income home energy assistance program, if they receive those benefits, or SNAP, the food stamps, which are also being cut along with tax credits, if they qualify for that, they can qualify for low-income community solar. And there's a number of other like income thresholds and that type of thing that can qualify for discounts for community solar. Utility bill credits, I swear I'm almost done. So going back to what Stacey was saying about virtual net metering, that's that process of the utility saying, we've received this, we've received your share of kilowatt hours from your community solar, and we're going to credit you on your bill for the value for that, which again is at the full retail rate again, which is fantastic. There's a 1-for-1. Every kilowatt hour your solar produces is offset 1-for-1. Question?
So where does the savings happen?
So this price, the energy model, this pennies per kilowatt hour, in theory, if this is lower than your electric utility rate that you're paying today, then you have a savings, right? What we often see is here in the state, this price for your electric bill is 12 cents a kilowatt hour, sometimes 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And all we got to do is be lower than that number to provide a savings, right? So again, each kilowatt hour is a 1-for-1. So if you would have bought this kilowatt hour from your utility at 12 cents a kilowatt hour, but you're buying it from your community solar subscription at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, then you've saved whatever that is, 12 minus 10 divided by 12, whatever percentage that is. Does that make sense? So the solar is cheaper than the standard electricity rate, is really what we're shooting for there. Not always the case. It's possible to really botch a project and have a solar project that's more expensive than the utility rate, in which case that project's going to go belly up because no one's going to pay a premium for solar energy anymore. That used to be a thing, by the way. They had they called them green pricing programs or green tariffs, and you used to have to pay a premium to get renewable electricity. Everybody remember that? Yes. I think Excel used to have, what did they call it? When they had the Ponoquin wind farm back in the 90s. I can't remember what it's called, but you used to have to pay a premium for renewable energy, and now through economies of scale and tax credits, it's cheaper. It's cheaper to purchase renewable energy. Subscription payments, consolidated billing versus separate subscription fee. So I went over this. So that's the 2 bills versus the 1 bill. 2 bills is confusing. 1 is really simple. Account management. The one thing I'll mention here is attrition, right? With community solar, just like any other voluntary program, you should be able to cancel at any time. And consumers sometimes do. You might move from your utility service territory to another utility service territory, or even out of the state, in which case you should be able to cancel your subscription without paying a cancellation fee. So that's part of the whole process, managing that attrition. And the last thing I'll mention is there's a whole cottage industry that has developed around doing this, doing all of these things, administering subscriptions and processing bill credits with utilities. So there's some good players out there that if you are a farmer or rancher and you want to do all of these things, hire an EPC to build the thing and then hire one of these guys to administer all of the paperwork that goes with the subscriptions. And that's what I basically recommend. And that's probably what the technical guide will pretty much reflect. Okay, so I just said a mouthful. Other thoughts or questions?
I really like the idea of kind of like decentralizing energy subscriptions in a way where energy is produced and harnessing something that is really quite sustainable. I'm imagining on the little lane, dirt lane where we live, we could have like a little community network that everybody on that street could subscribe from. One more question, can you be a business? Like, not just a farm, but could you be like a pot grower or somebody else who uses lots of energy, be a subscriber in a community solar farm?
Yes, oftentimes depending on the program there is a cap for subscribers, typically 40%. So for example, if Walmart wanted to own the entire output of the community solar array, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. They're typically capped at 40% of the total capacity, which is still a lot. But that can benefit a community solar project on the flip side, right? Because they call them an anchor tenant. That anchor tenant kind of underwrites the project to make it financially stable for everybody else. So I'm not poo-pooing it, but I think 40% is maybe a little excessive. Question back here.
Hi. So I've worked a lot with Fort Collins Utilities on energy policy, and we would love to see them partner on this. It's a bit of a hard sell for them. Do you have any experience working with Fort Collins Utilities? Would you be interested in partnering? There's 3 sites I can think of off the top of my head that would be great for this within the city. One of them being the landfill that's closing at the end of the year. Do you have any insights into that?
So short answer, yes. Yes, I've worked with Fort Collins Utilities previously. I'm a recovering utility guy myself, as I mentioned. Not just United Power, but also Platte River Power Authority here in town. So I'm very familiar with Leland and Pablo and the whole gang at Fort Collins Utilities. So we'd love to work with them again. Would love to develop a project here in town. This, of course, is just a technical guide for others to do it, but of course, as an organization, Grid Alternatives is always interested in pursuing that type of thing. And you mentioned the landfill. There is a 2 megawatt installation at Coyote Ridge that we built back in 2019. Yeah, we built it in partnership with PBREA, and now they are the owner of that. So yeah, we'd love to do another project up there.
Cool. Any kind of ideas on what the obstacles and opportunities are with Fort Collins Utilities?
Obstacles and opportunities, yes. So one of those obstacles, going back to the legislation applying to investor-owned utilities, Fort Collins is not subject to that, and Platte River is not subject to that. And those are the 2 entities that you have to convince, right? So in order, and even if you do convince them, and I've been down this path before, they're likely, at least Platte River is not likely to give you the full retail rate for that electricity, right? Remember on that slide, that was one of the important points here, is there's a 1-for-1 kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour bill credit under the law for the investor-owned utilities. That's really what you got to negotiate with Fort Collins Utilities and PRPA in order to make that happen and make a project viable. Good question.
Do you think they would be down for that?
Sorry.
Sorry, just real quick, do you think that they would be willing to do that?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I'll chat with you more later.
Is it because they're nonprofits, or I'm just wondering why they're not subject to that law?
Good question. So in the case of the cooperatives were actually a result of Roosevelt's New Deal. 1930s, rural electrification. There were not wires and electric utilities out in rural America. And so they created this new cooperative model to provide that service to rural America. And that was the model that was developed at that time during the Great Depression era. It was cooperative, which means if you are a member of that cooperative, you are an owner of that grid and that utility. You receive benefits from that, so capital credits. So at the end of the year, the cooperatives all send out credits to their members for their electricity. And they are democratically elected boards that administer them. So while the investor-owned utilities are regulated by the State Public Utilities Commission, the cooperatives are regulated by their own democratically elected board. What's the problem with that? The democratically elected board doesn't always have the expertise that the Public Utilities Commission might have. I'm not saying pro or con, I like that model, but I think there's a regulatory disparity there between the State Public Utilities Commission and another entity that's governed by a local board. Good question. A couple others here, sorry.
So what's your current approach to avoiding undersubscription or oversubscription? I imagine the latter is something you got to worry about more.
Yeah, the latter is definitely an issue. You're not allowed to oversubscribe, and in those cases, they just establish
You
what
just
it is.
cut it off.
Yeah, so if you're the next in line, you're added to the wait list, and then when somebody cancels the program, then you're added in next. For undersubscribing, that also used to be an issue because if you were subscribed at less than 100% of the output, then the difference, you would only be compensated at that energy rate again, so like the 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So you were incentivized to keep it right at 100% fully subscribed. Of course, that's the goal anyways, right? But this new law does allow for community solar developers to carry that balance of energy forward for up to 1 year. And then they can sell it back at the full retail rate when it is fully subscribed. So you're able to carry that balance forward 1 year at a time, and I'm sure there's some pretty complicated accounting there to define when it started and when the end of the 1 year is. But that's what the new law provides for.
Okay.
That's a good question too.
Yeah, 207 allows the addition of storage to community solar, so doesn't that mean you could arbitrage the time of use rate to greatly increase your revenue on a project?
Yeah, I love that idea. If you're at a utility that offers a time of use rate, energy arbitrage, buying low and selling high, a wonderful way. I think another good approach to community storage would be demand charges, right? So if you're paying $9 a kilowatt a month in demand charges, and I know I'm getting kind of technical, sorry. But if you're paying $9 a kilowatt a month in demand charges, and you can offset that through a 1-for-1 credit on your bill for community storage, I think that's possibly an even better fit than time of use charges. But I like that idea too, especially here in Fort Collins. We've got time of use. Good question. I feel like there's one other good question around here somewhere. Fred, did you have another?
Sure, do you have any potential projects identified for Urban Colorado?
No, I have a project in Pueblo, Colorado currently, but it was grant funded and we were shovel ready. We had just signed our EPC contract in July and the grant got pulled in August. So that project, I'm going to be honest with you, is struggling. We're looking to finance it or we might have to sell it ultimately. But that was going to be 100% low income solar in Pueblo where they really need it. But we are looking for other development opportunities, like you mentioned, so Fred, let's talk.
I know Housing Catalyst was looking to be an off-taker of a project like this. So,
Housing Catalyst?
yeah, they do low-income housing projects in Fort Collins. I don't know if they do it outside of Fort Collins as well. If so, that might be a great partner in an Excel territory project.
Yeah, I would love to talk with them. We currently work with housing authorities, so Boulder Housing Authority, Pueblo Housing Authority, Denver. We'd love to talk with them. By the way, I've got my business cards up front here if you are interested. Feel free to come and grab one. We can connect. Go ahead, sir.
Grid Alternatives looked at storage-only projects, no solar at all, just off-grid. Buy it low and sell it.
I think that is something that they've looked at. Our headquarters is in California, so I think there is some opportunity for that. We've done some microgrids, but I don't know if they're storage only or no solar. Solar is kind of our thing. I love batteries, but I love solar just a little bit more. So, yeah, I can't really think of any projects like that, but I don't think we'd turn our nose up to it and say no. I think you were first. Up here. Sorry.
Do you have an idea on which parts of the report you're going to modify specifically for agrivoltaics as compared to just general community solar advice?
Yeah, good question. So I think the main gist of the report is community solar, right? So we want to look at it through the lens of agrivoltaics. So I feel like there's going to be like a tweak, like that flow chart slide that I had.
Right.
I feel like there's a agrivoltaic lens for each and every one of those steps. And that's kind of, I'm open to suggestions, but that's kind of the approach I was thinking of taking for the technical guide.
Yeah, because we've been thinking about some of those steps, and we found that maybe certain things matter, like the EPC, but not necessarily the interconnection agreement, so
Yeah, good point,
I'd
yeah.
be curious to keep up with.
The utility doesn't care if it's agrivoltaic or not. Yeah, it looks the same to them. Yeah, good point. So that one's probably simple, but you're right, EPC is gonna be very different,
Mhm.
siting and site planning. Hopefully the permitting piece will be different, like I mentioned.
Do you
whether-
imagine the subscription piece being any different?
The community ownership
Okay.
will change that, right? If it's, if the owners is set up to get a return on investment, that will look like a capacity model. Whereas if the owners are set up to just lower their cost of energy for the life, then that will be an energy model. So I could see for agrivoltaics, the capacity model kind of coming back, which we haven't seen in the industry in a few years. Good question. Question, Ray?
Well, yeah, we didn't actually hear much about the agrivoltaic side of this, and I'm just wondering if there are other people in the room who could say more about what's being done specifically with agrivoltaic projects in the area. I mean, I'm familiar with a few initiatives, but I'd love to hear more about that.
This is where I punt it over to the Calc folks. You guys mind taking that one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I guess in Colorado in general, there's definitely a bit of an agrivoltaics hub here. We have Jack Solar Garden in Longmont. There's a lot of more projects popping up along the Front Range, and out even on the western slope, there's more projects. CDA has grant funding for agrivoltaic research demonstration projects. So it's definitely up and coming in Colorado. Fort Collins in particular, there's a few sites. We're looking to hopefully have some more here, but it's definitely in the initial steps right now of getting up and going.
And what about CSU?
Well, I can add on to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, as it should.
Because there would seem to be a lot of
52, we have 52 different solar systems across our campuses at this time, and 8 of them I would put in the category of agrivoltaics. And they're all smaller, as they're mostly demonstration/research projects. But of the categories that Joel put up, we have a small solar array over a feedlot spot with cattle. We have the sheep grazing variety. We have vegetable production. We have the first solar, I call it a solar fence, like where you drive a tractor. It's just a vertical, completely vertical solar array, so you can drive the tractor between the rows in a cornfield.
Those are really cool.
And over on the western slope, there's some agrivoltaic project right now in a vineyard. So there's a number of different applications that we have, you know, again, in this kind of research demonstration space.
But are you looking to scale any of that up as a part of your broader plan?
So it becomes I mean, initially, often because they're grant funded, or they tend to be smaller or follow the availability of the grant funding. But then also it becomes, if you're not doing a community solar model, your load, you know, in lots of agricultural locations, your load of your farm or ranch is only so big. So unless you have a way to sell it, and right now, just to overproduce and sell it at wholesale is not, it's not an economical, it's not a smart decision. So now, this is where I'm thinking about with the agrivoltaic space of, as a farmer or ranch, if you have a lot of acreage and you could develop a community solar project that, you know, goes well beyond the load of your operation, well then that becomes pretty neat, because then you've created a secondary business on your farm or ranch, created an opportunity for your, you know, friends and neighbors in your service territory to become subscribers.
Diversifying your income.
You know, yeah, so I think that's something that I'm excited about and interested in, and I don't know if the university would ever, I don't know that it would be appropriate or possible for us to be a host site, but that could be a way where we could utilize, I'd say, land resources to be a host site, but we probably can't be in the business of selling electricity, but But we have explored community solar options. There's some other complicated opportunities, but yeah, we're always looking at all the different ways we could be involved.
So much of it right now is in research, you know, because it's so much of it is in research, it's new right now. So you all have the rooftop solar, the spur campus.
Yeah.
So there's all these different styles that are being explored, and the data is just now really coming out for it. And I mean, even the economic feasibility studies haven't all been completed. I mean, because people don't want to invest in it unless it's economically
Yeah,
feasible.
these smaller arrays, and what Jack's Solar Garden has proven out too, is just trying to, can we improve our production capacity of, you know, we're combining agricultural production and vegetable crops or other kind of crops with solar production, so it's pretty exciting.
But there's like who Enterprises with the
Yeah, they
cattle
do
ranchers.
cattle grazing, they've done that on a few different sites.
And they're at
Southern
scale.
Yeah, and honestly, there's definitely opportunities for it to be at scale if the public wants that. In Delta County, there was just an 80 megawatt, so I think like 400 acre site put in that's agrivoltaics. And it was put in because there was public opposition for it just being a solar site. Once it was changed to agrivoltaics, it was able to be approved, so.
What kind of agriculture are they generating?
They have sheep. Yeah, they have sheep grazing on that site.
It's a lot of sheep.
Yeah.
That's really what I'd like the technical guy to help show the pathway for, is how do we scale this from kind of the smaller scale, serving immediate loads, to larger scale, serving lots of people.
Yeah, and even in the sheep grazing, sorry, Bill, but it allowed us to put solar where we couldn't otherwise by making it, right? Because we wanted to put some solar, we wanted to generate more solar, but by saying, hey, if we do it this way, well, we were utilizing this pasture for sheep grazing anyway, and by making that collaborative approach, then both services are delivered, and so that's really great. So.
Right. There's a few different places in Colorado right now with moratoriums on solar, and agrivoltaics is definitely an in to getting past that.
Interesting. Sorry, Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there's a new law of virtual power plants in Colorado. We're the leader in the United States in moving into that sector. And so starting in June, you'll be able to sell power and make money. You're not going to be limited, the cap on what you can produce will no longer be limited to your historical use. You can deploy whatever you want on your property and sell it. And plus there's new value streams, it's not just kilowatt hours. We've also monetized capacity, ancillary services, wires, alternatives. So that's 4 times the value of the underlying kilowatt hour. So there's going to be some real opportunity for, home-based businesses to be quite profitable at producing energy.
Is this for like somebody that's got a little spare rooftop solar and they can be involved in this?
If you're on Excel's grid.
Gotta be on Excel's grid, so not in the city limits of Port Collins.
Yeah, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union is sponsoring our energy farmer-owned virtual power plant.
Okay.
Basically, they got USDA to agree that energy is an agricultural crop, so energy farmers is what
If it
we're
is for
talking
ethanol, then it's gotta be for solar. I have a slightly, and I don't know how tangential this question is, but for people with experience in agrivoltaics, has there been any research done on how it affects marginal land? And I've done a lot of reading, but I don't know that. I've got more questions than answers about how it improves very marginal land, stuff that would barely be feasible for grazing. Has anybody got any answers?
I have a follow-up. Part of that question is, like, eastern Colorado dryland farmers, they typically maybe raise wheat every other year. Could agrivoltaics let them raise wheat every year? Kind of an open question.
Interesting questions. I don't know the answer to that. They come from Calc, no, of resources.
We have our first array going up in a kind of a dry land space, but I think they're mostly right now studying the impacts of just on the rangeland itself. And so, soil moisture content, plant growth, just those types of things to see, and then impacts of, you don't want, in this case, you don't want to be disruptive to what's there naturally. But at the same time, I guess you can determine some things that if you would have a healthier plant, more abundant coverage on the ground, then it might improve and increase your opportunity for grazing sustainably on those lands. So that it's just being installed now, and so the research and the findings would be, in the future. But I think you're not wrong in the question. I don't know I don't know, but there's some of our researchers probably know and are, investigating those hypotheses.
Thank you.
It's worth noting, there's a series called Heart of a Building, and they did with Roy Flatzelgraff, am I saying his name right?
Oh, yeah.
He's way out east, like Paxton, Yuma, and he's progressive on many levels of how he ranches and farms, and he's got vertical solar panels. He's looking at kind of everything to deal with the fact that things are getting drier, and everything he can do to throw at it, he's doing it. But that should be out. If you just do Heart of a Building, it's Paul Kreischer, and he should have an episode out on his YouTube channel on that. It was also featured, I think, on Rocky Mountain PBS.
Yeah, I think Roy actually has found with his panels that it's blocking the wind a little bit more, so the dust doesn't get blown around as much. And that will be in the documentary if you want to come see. But we found at Jack's as well, even just on our site, that in dry years we can get 20% more forage production than things outside the array. So it's definitely helping keep the soil moisture in the ground, the forage is growing better. And if we imagine we'll get more dry years in the future, then it'll help with that.
Yes, I see damage too. By the way, that documentary is fantastic. I watched it.
I'm glad you've seen it.
Yes. Mark Woltermeyer, we're working with on the Thistle Farm agrivoltaic project. Great guy. Great documentary. So anybody available on the 19th?
18th.
The 18th of November at the Lyric. Make sure to check that out.
I was going to throw one more kind of observation, because I had to go to Menards in Cheyenne last week. And I drove back on 85, and south of Cheyenne there's a rather large solar array. And when you look around that area, everything's grazed down to nothing. The tallest and healthiest forage in that area was and it's not an agrivoltaic array. But that was the best looking grassland I saw on the trip down. Everything else is overutilized. So, now of course, it probably should have a dual use. And up there it's going to be cattle or sheep. So I wouldn't necessarily, for marginal land, which frankly in this state is most of our land in terms of agricultural production, I think it's, when that research, and I'm not sure, Stacy, if you're talking, if that's the pivot grant, but looking at, what it does for dry land and these kind of marginal lands, it might actually, make them actually not marginal anymore, but productive from both an energy and even, a low impact grazing perspective.
Okay, I know someone out there is dying to get out of here. So let's cut it up there. Everybody like and subscribe on the YouTube video. And thank you for coming out.